Hello, everybody. Welcome to How to Leave a Cult. This is episode 3. We are going to talk about we're going to talk about school. We're going to talk about more dynamics of the cult. And we're going to talk about, some of the belief systems that I think drew my parents into it. And go from there. We'll see how far we get. So, after we got there, by then I think we lived in my parents' house. My parents had, I believe, at some point they purchased this house. I don't know when. But so we live in this house. We live with other families. I don't think there was many times that we ever lived alone after that until our family grew enough that, we were basically adults in relationships living with people too. So we're living in this big house in Mesa on 7th Street. And obviously we're little kids, so we have to start going to school. So there was a church school. I want people to understand there's different types of groups that do things differently. Our group was very had its own kind of little environment. You know what I'm saying? So it was pretty self-contained. People worked jobs in the community, but a lot of the people actually ended up creating their own companies. But the church was also a part of the community. So they started a private school, and the initial reason behind starting a charter school, eventually it was a charter school. The initial reason between starting a private school, to be honest with you, I think it was fully to be able to have a level of control. I went to public school a couple times when we were living there, but it was mostly because they ended up moving the school eventually, and I didn't live close enough. Explain that later. But we start going to the private school. It's run by the families. It's supported completely within the community of the church. I don't know how many members were there, maybe 100 or so. I don't know how many kids were in it, 15, 20. So we were broken up by ages. Some of the classes were taught all together. Some of the classes weren't. We would have recess, lunch, the whole 9 yards. It ran very similar to a very tiny little school. It was at a specific house that we used to go to. And then it was taught by the members who had some kind of schooling background. Many of them were actual teachers. So, and they got books. I mean, we were taught from the same type of books that you would get in any other school. We had workbooks, the whole 9 yards. We had math books, reading books, all of it. Other teachers would come in and teach other subjects here and there, things like history or stuff like that. I would say that it had some holes in it, but the general basis was definitely there. The additional thing that was also taught on top of this was they taught, things that were pertinent to the church. So things like us expressing, and they would teach some of the teachings that Duran would teach. And like I said, Dr. Duran was what he was called, and he was the spirit that Trina tranced. So there was this piece of it that was completely church affiliated. And there was no part of this community that was separated. They were because you were living collectively, they were in every part of your life. Even if you weren't living collectively, their whole goal was that they were a part of your life. So instead of it just being about you and your family unit, you go to work in the day, you take care of your kids, you do all this kind of stuff, you're now kind of immersed with this big, larger group of people, and they are also now your family. Not just when you go to church, but all of the time. They are considered, we had to start calling everybody aunt and uncle So anybody who was considered an adult was pretty much an aunt or uncle of the major, like all of us kids, everybody's parents were pretty much considered aunt and uncle, at least within the closer circle of things. So they preached that there was no actual hierarchy. That was a lie. There was completely and utterly very clear hierarchy. The idea was that everybody would be treated equally. I would say that families were ranked roughly by the ones who had the ability to bring more money in. And if you look back and you look at where families were, the ones that they had the ability to bring more money in by specifically asking outside family members to give them money. So, for example, my parents, my dad would get money from his parents on a regular basis for things, which would fund his life, but in turn it funded everybody's life because we shared money collectively. Career decisions were made based on what benefited the community. So people were expected to go into careers that would benefit. So we had a lot of teachers because that was a way that people could work within the school. We had attorneys so that we could sue anybody at the drop of a hat whenever that might be needed, which was often and regular. We had midwives because it was a cheap way to deliver babies. And when these services were done within the group, it was expected that that was something you gifted. So there was very little expectation that you were going to get paid. And then we had construction workers so that we could do the massive amounts of labor that needed to be done. And then everybody else after that pretty much did whatever they had to do to help in those types of businesses. Those were the main businesses that were run within the church. And although they were personal businesses to whoever it was who started it, it was expected that should show how you were affiliated in the church and that you should always be a good reflection of that. So, and there was, a handful of others here and there. The women did a lot of crafting, so they would do boutiques and stuff. The women, to raise additional money all the time, because they were always trying to raise additional money, they did some crafting boutiques because everybody was, could sew. We had what I later called a sweatshop. We'll explain that later. But as they were sewing and creating all this stuff, and then there was garage sales. For the longest time, my mom, and I think it was just a way for my mom to be able to bring in more money, but my mom did garage sales, and she did a lot of them with Marlo, who was one of the ministers, but the Trina and Stephen's daughter, and they would get just junk and sell it, and they would sell your stuff too. If they decided your stuff would be more worth being sold than it was for you to own it, they'd sell your shit. They sold people's shit all the time. So the sewing, I think initially it was a way to be able to inexpensively make gifts for people. And there was a while there where there were things that were hard to find, so sewing it was a great way to do that. But down the road, it became another way that they could do business, but also it was the way that they did a lot of baby showers and things like that, since there was a lot of babies being born. So the curriculum at the school, I'm going to go back to that really quick. The curriculum at the school, of course, it was your basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and we would also have some recess and stuff like that. But other than that, there was different people would come in. Could have been a parent. It could have been one of the ministers coming in to begin to mirror and shadow what was happening outside. Or some of the teachers would be teaching it to us as well. So if it was considered a part of the teaching, then it was valuable enough to begin to teach us. And that is kind of like basic tenets of things of the church on being respectful. One of the big things that I remember at a very young age is being taught that we should express our truths. And expressing our truths was expressing anything that we felt about anything. And then they would practice us doing and expressing ourselves. So we would have to tell our friends what we thought and how we felt about things. We would have to tell our parents what we thought and how we felt about things. What became very apparent when this first started is that telling our parents what we thought and how we felt was really this way that we were pitted as children against our parents. And there began to be this, as we're talking to our parents and expressing, it became a way that they could, in my opinion, manipulate us and turn us against our parents, but also control. Because I believe that the more that you can cause disruption and chaos within a family and get the family at each other, the more they could control us as a family unit and also keep us there. Because there was this regular indoctrination on the way things were and regularly what was wrong with our parents. So we were told all the time, and this is not just me, this is the children, this is the children within the group. It's like, thank God your parents brought you here. That is the best thing they could have done, because they are so fucked up that at least them bringing you here was the very gift that they've given you. This is the key to your salvation, so that you can be the closest version of God that's on the planet. Sound familiar? Because if you were raised in an environment like this, you were told something similar. Well, you were told something as far as like being in a group that was supposed to be some savior mentality, right? So you may have not been told those words, and you may have not been pitted against your parents necessarily, but that's a very regular thing that happens within cults, is this central idea that this is, if it wasn't for this group, you are damned in some way. And we didn't look at it like that. We were actually not even taught that we were taught about reincarnation, and that basically reincarnation is the idea that we come here to live and then we die and we go to, it's not exactly heaven, it's more like considered, the spirit world. And then we can come back again and we can relive. And so we were taught that, you can stop coming back if you do it right. So it was like, why don't you do it right this time so you never have to come back again? Because the earth plane was the literal hell of the situation. So don't care if you believe it or not. I'm just telling you what I was taught. I'm not necessarily saying I subscribe to it all today. So, okay, we're telling a story. So we begin being taught all these things about this teaching that we're in and about the way that our parents are. And I remember this story that begins being fed to me about that basically my parents have made a lot of mistakes. And I remember many processes when we first got here in the first couple of years, and I'm talking between the age of 8 to like 10 or 11, where I was sat down and my parents would tell me about all the mistakes that they had made and how they had had affairs. I remember sitting in a process being told that my parents had affairs and that they needed to express their affairs to me so that I could understand and so that I could express to them how upsetting that was to me. How upset are you that your parents had affairs on each other? How upset does that make you feel? And I'm a little kid. So hearing this kind of stuff about your parents as a small child, yes, it's fucking upsetting. You know what upsets me now? What upsets me now is that that my parents ever thought that that was a way that they would be more spiritual. Like, not appropriate to tell your children about your affairs at a very young age. Not saying that they may not know at certain times, but there was all this pressure put onto small children to begin to like hold their parents accountable for their mistakes. Then on top of that, the same message was put about my grandparents. So they were saying these things to my parents as well. It's like, well, thank God you guys are finally here so you can work out all this stuff. We're going to help you. We're going to help you get all this stuff out of the way, all the negativity, all your out of integrities. You're going to get all of this out of the way. It's your parents' fault. It's your parents' fault because all of the things they've expected of you and made you do. So thank God you're here so we can finally help you not be so fucked up and to stop having affairs on each other. And I mean, you know, like my parents lived in Austin, Texas. I'm not saying it was appropriate. I don't fucking give a shit. But yeah, they did. I mean, it was the 70s and the 80s. So, I mean, it was an indication of a lot of what happened at that time. That's theirs to work out from now on. But this idea that it should have ever been a part of the conversation with the children, so dysfunctional, so damaging. And I think that it was a tool to begin to turn us against our parents and create a level of chaos. And it was a way to control my parents' children. Because they began to give my parents the impression that my parents were shitty parents and that they were better at it. And since we're better at this than you, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. We're going to make this all okay. And so then they were given carte blanche into the way that we were parented. They were controlling us at school. They were feeding us all this stuff. And then they were controlling us at home too, because we became even like little spies. So we'd go to school and it was like, what's going on with your parents? Tell us, are there secrets in your household? So we're little kids and our parents have brought us into this. And so now they're asking us if there's secrets going on. And so like we are in school and these are the ministers and these are our aunts and uncles and these are the people that we've been told to trust. So now we're going to school and we're telling all the things that are happening at home as well. I was like, oh, well, you're like this little kid and you're like, yeah, you know, I really don't like it because my parents were yelling at each other yesterday. This is a true fucking story, you guys. Like, my parents were yelling at each other the other day and they get in fights a lot. And I don't like it when they yell at each other. I don't like it. It makes me really sad, you know, because that's what kids do. And that's what they think because they're little children, right? That's what your kids think when you get into, you know, gnashing, yelling fights in front of them. So there we are. And they're like, okay, so this is what you're going to do next time your parents get into a fight. And we want you to express to them how mad it makes you and how upset it makes you and how, you know, and if your dad does this again, this is what you're going to do. And I remember two of the kids, and a lot of us had siblings of similar ages. So two of the kids, a brother and a sister, their parents fought more than my parents fought, but they're brother and sister and they used to get in fights and they're like, okay, next time they get in a fight, I want you to walk into the room and just break a bowl on the ground. You're going to go and you're going to break a ball on the ground and you're going to say, stop fighting. So it's like now they're training this fucking chaos. And I mean, you had it coming at you from every angle. And there was no escape. A lot of people that grow up in a church. So this is one of the definitions of me of like fully cult. A lot of people that grow up in a church, if you're a child, you usually have somewhere that's outside of that, right? You have family outside of that you see on a regular basis, or even in your home life, it's not in the middle of this community. Your church is not in the middle of the community, or your school is not in the middle of the community. And once we joined this group, that was it. There was nothing that was outside of that, except for my grandparents on my mom's side and my dad's side, and they lived states away. And I was told what horrible people my dad's parents were from a very young age. So this is another thing that was a narrated story that we were fed. So my grandparents were affluent. My grandfather was a lobbyist in DC. You can look him up. They even did his obituary in USA Today and multiple things. My grandparents had a lot of money. And they began pitting my parents against my grandparents because of their choices. And they began to tell my parents that what was wrong with them was their parents making such poor parenting decisions, which is why they were here now, and they were going to help them so that they didn't make the same decisions against their children. So my dad's parents, the Walkers, because that was their name. It was this regular thing about, your parents did a horrible job, but the least that they can do is financially help you out. A lot of parents show their love in a lot of ways. Your parents can at least show their love with money. And so anytime anything was needed, my parents were sent to go to my grandparents to get money to fund it, while saying what pieces of shit my grandparents were. And I remember, I loved my grandparents. My grandmother was, I could tell you stories and stories of sweet things that she used to do, and she used to take me and my older sister to different things. When we lived in Maryland before we moved away, they lived in this huge house on this huge piece of property, and in the back there was this a horse barn. And we made an entire fort in there because there was no horses in it. We built this huge fort, and she had all these fake flowers, and we decorated it. And it may have been more my older sister, but she let me play in it. And I remember how much fun we used to have. I remember her reading me stories at night. This was my grandmother. But after we moved to Arizona and we joined, it became all about all the mistakes that my grandparents had made. And so I began to believe well, God, my grandparents must be horrible people because this is what everybody says about them. I don't want to be like that. Don't want to be like the Walkers. Even though, I am a Walker. So because of that, this is how they get you to begin to separate from the only people that will help you out of that at some point. This is how they ostracize and begin to manipulate you into cutting off relationships, or to controlling the relationships in a way that favors them. So this idea that my grandparents were all these different things is what began to create this emotional warfare of manipulating and being able to use my grandparents for what they wanted. And I think it was a big part in manipulating all of us. I will say my grandparents were amazing for never actually cutting us off. I'm not saying they couldn't have cut us off financially in different ways, but they always stood out there. And I think that the amazing grace of that situation is that we did all get out before they passed away. And it was really amazing to be able to visit my grandparents. And I wish I had done it in earlier days. And see them before they passed. If that has happened to you, I am sorry. Not because I did anything for it, but I'm sorry because I know it's very painful. And, you deserve to be able to rekindle the relationships coming out that you want to rekindle with the people that you love and you care about. And sometimes it is as simple as calling people and saying, hey, I've been in a bad place. Don't know that I can talk about it, but I want to tell you that I love you. You don't necessarily have to explain where you've been. You can just explain, hey, I love you and I want to have a relationship with you. And I don't think any of that was ever said. My grandparents were not the most vocal people. It was a generation where you didn't talk about those kind of things. So there is rebuilding after that kind of stuff if that has happened to you. These are things that groups do to cut you off, because when you're cut off, you have nowhere to go. So that is pretty much it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Again, please subscribe. You can check me out on social media. If you love this podcast, please give me a 5-star review. Give me a testimonial about it. And if you could share it with other people, that would be amazing. I appreciate you. I try to give you some kind of healing technique that we can do at the end of each episode. So if you are newly out of something, the one that I recommend doing today is mirror work. Mirror work is where you literally go and you stand in front of a mirror and you find things about you that you love. So when I first started doing this, I had a really hard time. Now I can fully go in front of a mirror and I can look myself in the eyes and I can say, I love you. I love you. So mirror work is about being able to tell yourself that you love you. And a lot of times, because of all of this negative stuff, like being told your family are all these horrible things, you begin to believe you are all these horrible things. So you have to begin to expel this stuff that has made it so difficult to see that you're this incredibly beautiful, lovable person. But you are. When you first start doing this, you may not believe it, but you just have to do it regularly. So when I tell you to do a practice, you're going to have to do it for a long period of time, which means practice it for a week. 30 days would be great. No less than 7, which means once in the day, I want you to go to the mirror. And if you can't say I love you yet, I want you to go to the mirror and find one thing that you love about yourself, one detail. You love what fabulous hair you have. You love these arched eyebrows. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't matter what it is. Love, find things that you can look at yourself and go, gosh, I love that part of myself. I love that. Do that once a day for a month. And find all the beautiful things that you are, because you are beautiful. And don't let anybody tell you any different. Thank you guys so much. I hope to see you at the next episode. And this is going to be a fun journey. Love to have your feedback. You can always reach out to me on social media. Thank you. Bye-bye.